I hate that saying, 60 is the new 40, or better yet, age is just a number. Not because they're as corny as they sound, but because they're not true. Not only is 60 60, but for me, 60 really sucked. 5 years ago on my 60th birthday, I was sitting in a Mexican restaurant in California with my buddy Sam, who was basically my only friend in the world. I was down in the dumps, and for good reason. On my 60th birthday, I was homeless. Okay, not completely homeless. I was sleeping on a friend's couch and babysitting his dog while he was in England for a month. I had no car, no credit card, and $483 in the bank. But hey, I was in Santa Barbara, within walking distance of Oprah and Ellen. So my friend Sam takes me to lunch and asks what my plans are for the rest of my life. I was at square one, as they say. Actually less than square one, because I come with a ton of baggage. Nobody in my family ever found themselves in this position, so the obvious conclusion was that I must be mentally ill. So I'm seated in this restaurant trying to absorb the very real fact that I'm now 60 and have nothing. My life is nothing like I wanted it to be. And the things I wanted, an intact, happy family, a golden anniversary to look forward to, an unblemished public record. Things that even if I started over right now and there were no bumps in the road ahead, would be impossible unless I lived to at least 120. In addition to my net worth of $483, I was twice divorced with 2 children, and because of my age and profession, was completely unemployable. If you're a TV comedy writer, once you hit 40, you can kiss the chance of any job goodbye, especially if you've been out of work for more than a few years, like yours truly. To my surprise, my buddy Sam, who is usually doom and gloom, looks up and rattles off something like this. You come from a good family. You went to NYU and have 2 great kids. You wrote for some of the best shows of the last 30 years. Whatever. It cheered me up for a second or two, before I threw in that I had the distinction of being sued by J.D. Salinger. You heard that correctly. The guy who wrote Catcher in the Rye sued me in 1982 because, when I was 26, I had the bright idea to write a mock interview with him, and then had the even brighter idea of sending it to People magazine. It sounded so much like Salinger that he got worried folks would believe it. I always wondered what it would be like to make national headlines. Well, I found out. Oddly enough, when Salinger sued me, he included the interview I was seeking, the only one he'd ever given. He described in extraordinary detail when he began writing and what drove him to write. His affidavit and my interview were indistinguishable from one another. They sounded identical. 6 months later, TV producer Norman Lear put me on his writing staff because he said I had a real ear for dialogue. So after a second margarita, my friend Sam became a philosopher. He said, the whole is equal to the sum of its parts, not the order of its parts. I countered with, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. Sam returned the volley with, then I guess Mickey Rooney was a failure. He was dirt poor as a kid, became rich and famous, married 8 times, was out of work for years, then did the entire run of Sugar Babies and still died broke. Most people consider his life a success overall, but not if you think of it in that exact order. But there was no cheering me up. Everything I wanted from this life I could never have. So I asked myself, what if I only had 10 days to live? Then I wrote a handful of letters to family and friends, apologizing for what a jerk I've been. Salinger was far from my only screw-up. Then I went online and made a will, wrote a brief obit, and uploaded all my work, published or not, to the Internet Archive, where it could be accessed for free by anyone in the world. So now that I'm officially dead, I decide to visit my parents in Pennsylvania, because for one thing, I'm homeless, and because I'm the only person my age who is lucky enough to have both parents alive and well. As of today, my mom is 88, my dad is 96. I planned to visit for 6 weeks to regroup. That was 5 years ago. After a few months of grocery shopping and doing dishes and emptying the trash, and after realizing everybody from my hometown had moved away decades ago, I must have had a lethargic look on my face because my mom said, "You need to do something. Why don't you take a class?" A class in what? Ceramics? Then why not get together with Marty? He's still around. True, there was one guy who still lived in my hometown that I kept in touch with. I met Marty Kriswanis in the 4th grade, as in age 9. For the past 25 years, Marty restored and tuned pianos, but unbeknownst to me, he was also a filmmaker. Maybe we could work on a project together. When I worked on The Tonight Show back in the 80s, we kept a wish list of celebrities and historical figures, dead or alive, who we'd love to book on the show. People who wouldn't come on if their lives depended on it, like Queen Elizabeth. People who couldn't come on, like Mark Twain or Elvis. Marty and I decided to create a talk show with fantasy guests. I wrote the pilot, and Marty brought the show to life. He somehow figured out how to interview a dead person. As we went into production, I remembered something Norman Lear had said to me years before. "Your big mistake with Salinger was you should have waited until he died." So, Over My Dead Body was born, and it suited me perfectly since I was already dead. The concept is simple. We travel around the world to cemeteries of famous dead people, and our host is seated in a director's chair on top of the grave with a mic plugged into the headstone. Actually, we do it in a studio and use voiceover actors for our guests. But don't tell anybody. We get information about the person's life, see what they're working on now, get their take on current events, answer questions from callers in real time, and even throw in a few family recipes. One thing we don't do is mention that our guests just happen to be dead. No talk of heaven or hell or ghosts or goblins. We're simply catching up with some high-profile people who have been out of the loop for a while. People like Robert Kardashian, Nostradamus, Steve Jobs, Phyllis Diller. The list is endless, and when invited, they always say yes. Incidentally, during all the years of moping around feeling sorry for myself, television had changed. The internet arrived and multiple platforms came along with it. The show is now everywhere, even on Times Square. Not bad for a guy who died at age 60. I was on top of the world when Marty and I went to an award show where we'd been nominated for our Mae West episode. It was quite an event. They ran a clip from the show and the place exploded. Then a guy 2 rows behind us leaned over toward me and said, "I love this show, even though I've never heard of any of the people in it." He had to be kidding. But no, he said he wasn't. Then other audience members chimed in. They were all in their early 30s, and aside from Steve Jobs, they had no idea who we'd interviewed. Some of the most famous and influential figures from our history and culture. Not a clue. When you have a chance, ask a handful of 30-year-olds if they've ever heard of Jack Benny, Groucho Marx, Billie Holiday, Milton Berle, Katharine Hepburn, Jimmy Durante, Jackie Gleason, George Burns, Lauren Bacall, Louis Armstrong, Golda Meir, and let's throw in Mickey Rooney for my friend Sam. I came home that night knowing we had a cool show, but feeling I was back to square one. I'm really not sure what I was expecting, but it was certainly something more. Was I looking for immortality? My father says the one thing people want most from life is to be remembered, and that it's a lost cause. We're here for a short time and only get one shot at it. I flashed back to what Sam had told me on my 60th birthday and decided he might be right. The whole is equal to the sum of its parts, not the order of its parts. I began to see my life as a movie that's been shot out of sequence, but when assembled correctly, it's the story I've been seeking. Few people know this, but the final scene of Rocky was shot on day 1. Writers love index cards. We put random scene ideas on them until there's a big stack, then lay them on the floor and shuffle them around until there's a flow to the story. One morning, I wrote what I felt were the good things in my life, and then the bad things. Marriages, divorces, landing a big job, getting canned, successes and failures, happiness and disappointment. It was quite a stack. Then I laid them out in the order they occurred. It wasn't a pretty picture, and there was certainly no Hollywood ending, at least not yet. I ended up with 37 cards with events such as childhood, college, first and second marriages, first and second homes, 2 divorces, being hired, being fired, lawsuits, bankruptcy, house arrest, travel, grandchildren, moving home, creating a TV series, doing a TEDx talk. Then I started moving things around. I didn't add anything I'd wished had happened or done differently, nor did I leave anything out. I didn't have to change much. I moved my legal troubles between my first and second marriages. I put buying the house in Malibu after my second marriage, and what I saw laid out before me was a full, imperfect, and certainly colorful life. I was no longer at square one. George Bernard Shaw said, "Life isn't about finding yourself, it's about creating yourself." Better still, Voltaire maintained that history is a fiction that has been agreed upon. I believe that our lives can be complete at any given point. According to the Pickering study from the University of Chicago, of the 12,000 seniors who were asked if they had to do it over again, would they, just 27% answered yes. Those same people were asked if their lives turned out according to plan, and 100% said no. So of the estimated 105 billion births on Earth since the year 50 BC, are we to assume that virtually everyone who has ever lived has not had the life they'd imagined or planned? In 2010, leadership expert Peter Bregman wrote in the Harvard Business Review that not having a plan can be the best plan of all. He used Facebook co-founder Mark Zuckerberg as one of his prime examples. The late Dr. Herbert London, my dean at NYU, claimed that 75% of people over age 60 are regretful and scared. Not a cheery thought. Having now put my life in proper order, my perspective has changed. If you're 60 and at square one, please reconsider your definition of that term. If you've made it through 6 decades, there are plenty of good things to hang your hat on. It may sound simple, even borderline stupid, but do yourself the biggest favor of your life and spend 1 hour putting your life on index cards and shuffling them into a preferred order. You can laugh all you want, but I promise you'll see a different person in the mirror when you're done. And you will never feel like you're at square one again. It's a permanent brain hack. The results won't go away. I'm proud of many things I've done in my 65 years, and I'm ashamed of some others. But I'm no longer at square one. When I wake up each morning, the first thing I see is a framed picture on my nightstand of a quote by E.L. Doctorow. Writing a novel is like driving at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but it's possible to make the entire journey that way. Thank you very much.